Eleanor had always been the heart of her family, the quiet force holding everything together through the years. At 67, she had spent decades nurturing her husband, raising her two sons, and creating a home filled with love and laughter. But all of that seemed to vanish the moment her husband passed away. What she thought would be a time of family support and shared grief turned into an unexpected storm of neglect and disregard. Her sons, once cheerful children who ran to her with every triumph and failure, now barely acknowledged her presence. Their wives, polite but distant, seemed to treat Eleanor as an inconvenient guest rather than the mother who had given them life and love. Invitations to family gatherings were rare, and when she did attend, she often found herself overlooked in conversations, her thoughts dismissed as outdated or irrelevant. Every attempt to engage, to remind them of the warmth and care that had built this family, was met with impatience or polite indifference. At first, Eleanor tried to reason with herself, convincing herself that grief had changed people, that her sons were simply struggling to cope. But as days turned into weeks, she could no longer ignore the growing distance, the subtle snubs that made her feel invisible in her own home. Even the small gestures she had once taken for granted, a phone call to check in, a shared cup of tea, a thoughtful smile, were gone. The emptiness settled in like a cold draft, and with it came a deep sense of betrayal. How could the people she had loved most, the ones she had sacrificed for without a second thought, treat her as though she were nothing? But Eleanor was not a woman to be quietly erased. Though her heart ached, a quiet determination began to grow within her. She realized that life had handed her an unexpected opportunity to reclaim her dignity, assert her worth, and show her family that love and loyalty could not be taken for granted. She began to plan, carefully and thoughtfully, a way to reveal the truth about her husband's will, one that would remind her sons of the respect they owed her and the consequences of underestimating her. In this story, you will follow Eleanor's journey of quiet strength and clever resolve. It is a tale that touches on family dynamics, respect, and the power of standing up for oneself, even when faced with those we hold closest. Her story is not just about loss and betrayal. It is about reclaiming control, dignity, and the ability to turn adversity into triumph. If you find Eleanor's journey inspiring, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story of courage and empowerment. Her story reminds us all that it is never too late to take charge of our lives and show the world our true strength. After months of enduring cold shoulders and whispered complaints behind her back, Eleanor had started to grow accustomed to the invisible wall that her sons and their wives had erected between them. She moved through the house that had once been filled with laughter and the scent of her husband's favorite meals as if she were a ghost, careful not to disturb the fragile peace she was not allowed to enjoy. It was a strange, hollow existence, one that made her question not only her family's loyalty, but also the value of a life spent selflessly giving to others. Yet, beneath the ache of loneliness and quiet betrayal, a flicker of hope remained, nurtured by a secret she alone knew, a secret that would soon transform her position from overlooked to untouchable. Her husband, the man who had been her partner through decades of joy and hardship, had always been thoughtful in ways that were not immediately visible. He had anticipated, perhaps more clearly than she realized, the tension that would surface once he was gone. While the family had assumed that his affairs would favor the sons, cementing their role as heirs to his estate, he had quietly prepared a legally binding will, naming Eleanor as the sole inheritor, a document kept away from prying eyes, carefully safeguarded in his study. This was not the sort of will that could be contested lightly. It had been drawn up with meticulous attention to legal detail, ensuring that any attempt to bypass it would be met with firm consequences. The visible will, the one that had been read first in the dimly lit lawyer's office, seemed to confirm the sons' assumptions, distributing assets in a way that appeared to favor them, while leaving Eleanor with token gestures of property or belongings of sentimental rather than monetary value. Watching her sons, eyes light up with anticipation as they imagined their inheritance, a mix of pride and bitterness swelled inside her. She felt the sting of exclusion, yet alongside it grew an almost mischievous excitement, a quiet thrill that came from knowing the truth that they could not yet see. She had, after all, been underestimated, written out of the immediate equation, seen as weak and compliant, when in reality she held the final card. For weeks she allowed the tension to build. She smiled when her sons boasted about imagined fortunes, nodded politely when they discussed plans for properties and accounts, as if she were merely a background figure. Every conversation, every casual remark, was a thread she wove into the fabric of a larger, carefully orchestrated revelation. She remembered the evenings spent with her husband, their whispered conversations about family dynamics, his gentle laughter, as he anticipated her ability to navigate the challenges ahead with grace. His foresight had been uncanny, and now, in the quiet aftermath of his passing, it became her secret weapon. The day she finally revealed the existence of the secret will was not marked by grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. She chose a moment when the room was still, when her sons' confidence had reached its peak and their sense of entitlement had blinded them to the quiet patience she had cultivated. With a steady hand she produced the document, the paper crisp and commanding, a tangible testament to her husband's intentions and her rightful claim. Their faces, once filled with smug anticipation, shifted through a spectrum of disbelief, shock, and finally reluctant acknowledgement, as the truth unfolded with an undeniable clarity. It was not merely a matter of money or property, it was a matter of respect and recognition, the acknowledgement that years of loyalty, care, and shared life were not to be erased or dismissed. As her sons grappled with the reality of their oversight, Eleanor felt a sense of vindication that was quiet yet profoundly satisfying. The estate, which had seemed a battlefield of favoritism and exclusion, became instead a stage upon which she demonstrated the power of patience, foresight, and inner strength. In that moment, the dynamic of the family shifted, not through anger or confrontation, but through the undeniable authority granted by truth and justice. Even as the initial shock settled, Eleanor understood that this was not the end of her journey. Reclaiming her place as the rightful heir was one thing. Maintaining her dignity and the respect of those around her would be an ongoing effort. Yet she approached the future with renewed confidence, knowing that she had navigated one of life's most delicate challenges with intelligence, composure, and courage. The hidden will, once a secret, became a symbol of her resilience, a reminder that true strength often lies not in forceful assertion, but in the quiet, deliberate actions taken with foresight and purpose. Her story, though deeply personal, offers a universal lesson about the dynamics of family, the complexities of loyalty, and the importance of self-respect. Eleanor's journey was not simply about inheritance. It was about reclaiming agency, in a world that sometimes overlooks the contributions and worth of those who have long given without expectation. It was about proving, with grace rather than anger, that being underestimated can be turned into one of life's most profound advantages, and that patience, wisdom, and dignity are often the most powerful tools available to those who seek fairness and recognition. If you found Eleanor's story compelling and inspiring, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories that celebrate courage, cleverness, and the quiet triumphs that can change lives. Her journey reminds us all that even in the face of betrayal and neglect, strength and resilience can reveal themselves in the most unexpected and rewarding ways. The morning of the scheduled will reading arrived with an unusual quietness that seemed almost conspiratorial, as if the house itself was aware of the shift that was about to take place. Eleanor moved through the rooms with a calm that belied the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. Her sons and their wives were busy with the final touches of preparation, arranging themselves in a manner that suggested dominance and expectation, confident that the day would confirm the inheritance they believed was assured. She observed them silently, noting their smug expressions and the subtle ways they positioned themselves as if the house were theirs, the air heavy with entitlement and self-assurance. It was in these moments, standing quietly in the background while the world seemed entirely focused on the illusion of their control, that Eleanor felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation, knowing that the truth she carried could upend their assumptions in an instant. The journey to the lawyer's office was unremarkable to anyone else, but fraught with significance for Eleanor. As they drove through streets lined with autumn-tinted trees, she thought of the years she had spent in partnership with her husband, the quiet sacrifices, the laughter, and the challenges they had faced together. Each memory was a thread in the intricate tapestry that had led to this moment, threads that her sons had scarcely noticed or appreciated. Believing that the world revolved around their ambitions and desires, she recalled her husband's foresight, his subtle instructions to ensure that her rights were protected, and the careful legal planning that had gone into the creation of the will hidden from the immediate view of anyone but herself. This thought alone strengthened her resolve, providing a sense of empowerment that contrasted sharply with the years of feeling dismissed and overlooked. Upon entering the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was already tense with expectation. Her sons, accustomed to being the center of attention, sat with the confident air of those who believe victory is predetermined, while their wives exchanged knowing glances, convinced that the reading would reaffirm their assumed privileges. Eleanor remained composed, her presence understated, yet undeniably commanding, as if the very act of her being there introduced an invisible gravity that unsettled the room. The lawyer, a figure accustomed to protocol and the formalities of inheritance proceedings, began with the will that had been filed publicly, distributing assets in a manner designed to favor the sons, an arrangement that was both predictable and, in its predictability, intoxicating to them. Smiles crossed their faces, eyes glinting with satisfaction as they discussed imagined plans, unaware that the reality of their father's intentions had yet to unfold. When the moment arrived, Eleanor drew from her bag a separate envelope, sealed and stamped with the unmistakable authority of legal confirmation, a document that her husband had prepared meticulously to ensure its legitimacy and her protection. With a steady hand, she placed it before the lawyer, her calm demeanor signaling the gravity of what was about to be revealed. The room, once dominated by the sons, confident chatter, and the wives, subtle nods of approval, fell into a palpable silence, an almost electric tension that hung between anticipation and disbelief. As the lawyer opened the envelope and read aloud the contents, the air shifted, thickening with shock, confusion, and the sudden awareness that the narrative they had believed inviolate was, in fact, entirely subverted. Her sons, expressions transformed from triumph to incredulity, a mixture of denial and reluctant acceptance, painting their faces as the reality sank in. Eleanor watched, not with vindictive joy, but with a quiet assertion of dignity, as the legal declaration of her husband's true intentions dismantled the assumptions that had guided their behavior for months. The will, unambiguous and binding, confirmed that she was the sole heir, placing her in a position of authority and recognition that she had long been denied. The room seemed to contract around the revelation, the weight of truth pressing upon everyone present, altering the dynamics that had once seemed so fixed. As the lawyer reiterated the validity and enforceability of the document, the sons and their wives struggled to reconcile their expectations with the undeniable facts now laid bare before them. Eleanor remained composed, her presence a testament to years of patience and resilience, a living reminder that foresight, careful planning, and quiet strength could overturn assumptions and reclaim respect. There was no need for raised voices or dramatic confrontation. The authority granted by truth and legality spoke louder than any argument or emotional outburst could. The room, once filled with the arrogance of presumed entitlement, now centered on the unassailable fact that Eleanor's rights were both legitimate and enforceable, and that the legacy her husband had intended for her could not be denied. The aftermath of the revelation was subtle but profound. Conversations that had been dominated by presumptions of wealth and inheritance shifted to acknowledgement and reluctant dialogue as the sons processed the implications of their misjudgment. Eleanor's position within the family, long marginalized, now commanded a respect that had been denied for too many years, an authority not sought aggressively but earned through patience, composure, and the foresight of her husband's careful planning. The power of the moment lay not only in the legal confirmation of her inheritance, but in the demonstration of strategy, dignity, and the quiet strength that had guided her actions from the shadows into the center of undeniable truth. As the day concluded, Eleanor left the lawyer's office with a sense of measured satisfaction, the knowledge that her husband's intentions had been honored and her rightful position asserted. The encounter was a reminder that true authority is not always displayed through force or confrontation, but can emerge through careful preparation, patience, and an unwavering commitment to what is just. In revealing the secret will, she had reclaimed not only material inheritance, but also the respect, recognition, and validation that had long been withheld, transforming a moment of exclusion into a lasting assertion of her rightful place in the family, and the legacy her husband had meticulously ensured she would inherit. As the lawyer's voice continued to read aloud, the room seemed to shrink around the gravity of the revelation, and Eleanor felt the subtle shift of power, settling like a quiet triumph that demanded no outward celebration. The will, carefully constructed and meticulously detailed by her late husband, did more than simply name her as the sole heir. It outlined provisions that spoke volumes about the family dynamics he had observed and sought to correct. Each clause was a deliberate act of foresight, a reflection of his understanding of human behavior and the consequences of entitlement when untethered from respect and principle. The sons, who had entered the room with confident smiles and an air of unquestioned expectation, now found themselves facing a reality they had neither anticipated nor prepared for, their imagined entitlement slowly unraveling before their very eyes as the implications of the legal document sank in with uncomfortable clarity. Eleanor's gaze remained steady, her composure unshaken as the lawyer elaborated on the provisions that directly addressed her sons' conduct and attitudes. It was a subtle but unmistakable mechanism. Their financial allowance, though technically part of the inheritance, was conditional upon their treatment of her, a clear instruction that respect was not merely expected but required, and that any attempt to circumvent this principle could nullify their access to even the smallest portion of the estate. The precision of the language left no room for misinterpretation or dispute, establishing a framework in which the sons' behavior would determine the scope of their benefit, effectively discouraging any frivolous legal challenges or disputes that might arise from wounded pride or misunderstanding. The silence in the room was thick, a mixture of shock and disbelief settling like dust, as each member of the family absorbed the subtle genius embedded in what might have appeared, at first glance, a simple document. As the clauses were read, detailing the minimum allowances tied to Eleanor's well-being and the requirement that her sons demonstrate respect and cooperation, the transformation in the room's energy was palpable. The arrogance that had once filled the air, a blend of expectation and entitlement, gave way to hesitation and calculation. The sons exchanged uncertain glances, their prior certainty undermined by the recognition that their father's foresight had accounted for both their ambition and their flaws, turning their anticipated advantage into a test of character they were ill-prepared to pass. Eleanor, in contrast, felt a quiet surge of empowerment, a confirmation that patience, dignity, and adherence to principle could restore balance to a situation that had long seemed skewed against her. The provisions were not punitive out of spite, but were carefully designed to enforce a principle that her husband had held dear, that respect within a family is not optional, and that inheritance, while a transfer of material wealth must be accompanied by ethical responsibility and human decency. The atmosphere was heavy with realization, and the lawyer's calm explanation of the conditional clauses reinforced the inescapable truth. Eleanor's position was now legally secured, and her authority in matters of family inheritance could not be contested without explicit violation of the conditions that had been set forth. The sons' imagined leverage had evaporated, replaced by the stark understanding that their actions, not their assumptions, would now determine their outcomes. The once confident smiles faded, replaced by a tense calculation, as the subtle brilliance of their father's planning revealed itself not only as a legal safeguard, but also as a moral assertion, a reinforcement of the principles that had long guided the family in spirit, if not in practice. Eleanor listened, absorbing the reactions and noting the shift in the dynamics that had defined their relationships for years. She felt no desire for vengeance, only a profound satisfaction in the knowledge that fairness and foresight had prevailed, that her husband's intentions had been honored, and that the legacy he had envisioned for her was now manifest in both authority and respect. The minimal allowances for the sons, tied directly to their conduct and deference, were more than financial instruments. They were a statement of values, a means to teach, subtly but firmly, the importance of recognizing and honoring the contributions, wisdom, and rights of those who had nurtured and guided them through life. It was a reminder that inheritance, while material, carries with it ethical obligations that define character and maintain familial harmony. As the reading concluded, the room remained suspended in the quiet tension of realization, the sons slowly coming to terms with the implications of a document that had been designed not merely to transfer wealth but to ensure accountability and respect. Eleanor's presence, poised and dignified, reinforced the authority that the will had conferred, a living embodiment of the principles encoded in the legal text. The provisions served their intended purpose, not through confrontation or conflict, but through the unassailable clarity of law and intention, a testament to her husband's insight and the enduring power of foresight when coupled with justice and moral awareness. In the hours that followed, the family began the slow process of acknowledgement. The sons, discussions tempered by the recognition that the path to inheritance was now inseparably linked to their conduct toward their mother. Eleanor's position, once marginalized by dismissal and oversight, was now both affirmed and protected, a reflection of years of resilience, thoughtful planning, and the quiet strength required to navigate the complexities of family dynamics. The conditional provisions of the will had achieved what decades of negotiation and assertion could not. They had reshaped relationships, established authority, and ensured that respect, not entitlement alone, would govern the family's engagement with its legacy. In the subtle genius of the arrangement, Eleanor found not only security, but also vindication, a tangible confirmation that justice, foresight, and human dignity can prevail even in situations long overshadowed by expectation and presumptive privilege. After the dust of legal revelation had settled and the subtle tension that had defined the household for so long began to dissipate, Eleanor felt a profound shift within herself, a sense of liberation that was as much emotional as it was practical. For decades, her life had been circumscribed by the expectations, demands, and occasional indifference of those closest to her, yet now, empowered by the knowledge that her husband's foresight had secured not only her financial stability, but also her authority and dignity, she found herself contemplating possibilities that had long seemed out of reach. The condo she chose was more than just a residence. It was a deliberate assertion of autonomy, a space where she could define her routines, decorate according to her tastes, and embrace the independence that had been denied to her in the shadow of her sons' control. Each morning, waking in the sunlight that filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, she felt a sense of calm and excitement mingled together, a subtle reminder that freedom, once realized, carries both responsibility and the joy of rediscovery, an invitation to experience life on her own terms. Eleanor filled her new space with colors, textures, and objects that resonated with her personality, turning each room into a reflection of her tastes and values. She found herself lingering over small luxuries that had been impossible to indulge in before, from the selection of artwork that spoke to her sense of beauty and history, to the arrangement of furniture that allowed her to move freely and thoughtfully through her daily routines. Even the kitchen, once a functional necessity, became a canvas for experimentation, where she could explore recipes and flavors without judgment, recreating dishes from her past, innovating new ones, and occasionally inviting friends or neighbors to share in the pleasure of a meal. Every choice reinforced a sense of self that had been quietly overshadowed, cultivating an environment where creativity, comfort, and autonomy intertwined seamlessly, and where she could reflect on the journey that had led her to this moment with a mixture of gratitude and pride. Beyond the physical comforts of her condo, Eleanor reveled in experiences that had long been inaccessible or overlooked, ranging from simple pleasures like morning walks through nearby parks to more adventurous undertakings, such as enrolling in art classes, attending lectures, and exploring cultural events that had always piqued her curiosity. These activities, once peripheral or imagined, became integral to a daily rhythm that was now unbound by familial expectations, allowing her to cultivate friendships and connections that reflected her interests rather than her obligations. The freedom to plan her days according to her desires imbued even ordinary moments with a sense of significance, transforming errands, commutes, and solitary afternoons into opportunities for reflection, learning, and joy, and creating a life that was as rich in meaning as it was in comfort. As Eleanor navigated this new chapter, she discovered a renewed sense of confidence that was not merely derived from financial security, but from the tangible affirmation that her choices and well-being were now central, rather than secondary, in her life. The transition from being under the influence of her son's expectations to establishing a space and lifestyle that prioritized her agency was both exhilarating and quietly profound, underscoring the importance of self-determination and the value of pursuing personal fulfillment at any stage of life. Each decision she made, from the layout of her living room to the books she read and the events she attended, was imbued with intention, reinforcing a narrative of autonomy, and demonstrating, through daily practice, that respect for oneself is inseparable from the freedom to shape one's existence. Travel, once considered a distant dream or occasional obligation, became an essential aspect of her renewed sense of adventure. Eleanor planned trips that ranged from local explorations of museums and gardens to more ambitious journeys that took her across states and, eventually, international destinations, each voyage an opportunity to immerse herself in cultures, cuisines, and landscapes that had previously existed only in her imagination. These experiences were not mere escapes, but deliberate acts of self-expression, ways to celebrate the life she had earned through resilience and patience, and to reaffirm that the world, vast and varied, held endless opportunities for discovery and delight. In each new city or town, she found moments of reflection that deepened her appreciation for her own story, and she began to understand that freedom is most profoundly felt when coupled with curiosity, courage, and the willingness to embrace change. The emotional transformation paralleled the practical adjustments in her life, as she navigated the subtle complexities of independence after decades of reliance and constraint. Eleanor cultivated routines that balanced leisure and productivity, social engagement and introspection, always mindful that her choices were now hers alone, guided by preference rather than expectation. Even mundane tasks, grocery shopping, organizing finances, scheduling appointments, took on a new resonance as acts of self-reliance, reinforcing the lessons embedded in her husband's thoughtful planning and her own years of patience. Each small victory, each successfully navigated challenge, became a symbol of her competence and an affirmation of her worth, a counterpoint to the neglect and disregard that had previously defined her interactions with her family. Throughout this period, Eleanor's personal growth was both subtle and striking. She embraced the joy of quiet mornings, the thrill of spontaneous outings, and the satisfaction of achievements that reflected her values rather than the expectations of others. Her relationships, once fraught with tension and imbalance, began to shift as she interacted with others from a position of confidence and self-respect, fostering connections based on mutual appreciation rather than obligation. The condo, the experiences, and the independence it enabled were not merely symbols of wealth or comfort, but tangible manifestations of her resilience. Her foresight in honoring her husband's legacy, and the profound truth that a life lived fully is one where autonomy, curiosity, and dignity coexist harmoniously. By the time the weeks had settled into months, Eleanor had transformed her existence into a tapestry of deliberate choices, rich experiences, and personal satisfaction, a life that honored both her past and the freedom she had earned. She understood that her journey was not just about moving into a new space or enjoying material comfort, but about embracing the authority and autonomy that had been denied to her, turning what could have been a moment of bitterness into a chapter defined by empowerment, fulfillment, and the quiet, enduring joy of living fully on her own terms. As Eleanor settled into the rhythms of her new life, she could not help but reflect on the lessons that had emerged from the tumultuous events of the past months. Lessons that resonated far beyond the confines of her condo or the legal intricacies of her late husband's will. The story of her journey was, in many ways, a testament to the profound importance of foresight, a reminder that the careful consideration of future possibilities can safeguard dignity, security, and peace of mind, even in the most uncertain circumstances. Her husband, in leaving a carefully constructed legal plan that ensured her comfort and autonomy, had not only provided material protection, but had also conveyed a subtle yet powerful message about the value of thoughtfulness and planning in human relationships, underscoring that the choices made today can reverberate across years, shaping outcomes and preserving respect, even when tempers flare and loyalties are tested. Through the ordeal with her sons, Eleanor came to understand more fully the necessity of setting clear boundaries, both emotional and practical, a principle that had often been obscured by familial obligation and the weight of unspoken expectations. The initial disregard she experienced, the subtle dismissals, the exclusion from her husband's will reading, and the casual minimization of her voice within her own home, served as a catalyst for a deeper recognition of the ways in which boundaries maintain both personal integrity and relational health. She realized that asserting limits, whether through legal instruments, personal decisions, or simply the courage to step back and demand respect, was not an act of selfishness, but a form of self-preservation, a way to cultivate relationships that were grounded in genuine regard rather than convenience, entitlement, or inherited assumption. In asserting her rights and honoring the will, she had not only reclaimed her own agency, but had also established a model for how relationships, whether with family or friends, thrive when guided by respect, fairness, and transparency. Equally significant was the lesson about valuing genuine relationships over financial incentive, a truth that had revealed itself gradually amid the shifting dynamics of her family. Her son's initial focus on wealth, entitlement, and inheritance contrasted sharply with the deeper currents of loyalty, care, and mutual appreciation that had been present in her marriage and in her own enduring friendships. By structuring the will in a way that rewarded respect and consideration rather than blind pursuit of money, Eleanor and her husband had highlighted the intangible yet profoundly influential currency of human regard, demonstrating that trust, empathy, and integrity hold far greater significance than material gain. The unfolding of events allowed her to observe firsthand how relationships that are cultivated with attention, honesty, and reciprocity endure, whereas those founded solely on expectation or desire for personal advantage often falter when tested by circumstance. As she embraced her new independence, the interplay of these lessons became woven into the fabric of her daily life. Her mornings began with deliberate intention, whether it was savoring quiet coffee on the balcony, reading, or planning a visit to a gallery, each activity a conscious assertion of the value she placed on herself and her choices. She explored her surroundings with a sense of curiosity and purpose, discovering that the world, when approached with openness and discernment, offered endless opportunities to deepen understanding, foster authentic connections, and cultivate a sense of fulfillment that was both immediate and enduring. Each interaction, from casual conversations with neighbors to engagements with new friends, was guided by the principle that genuine regard and mutual respect were worth more than wealth or status, and that the integrity of one's relationships could enrich life in ways money never could. Her reflection extended beyond the personal to a broader understanding of human nature and the dynamics that shape families and communities. She recognized the patterns of expectation, entitlement, and assumption that can distort relationships, and the ways in which foresight and boundary setting function as corrective measures, tools that protect the vulnerable and ensure that respect and fairness are not left to chance. Eleanor's own journey illuminated how careful planning, ethical consideration, and attentiveness to the emotional currents of family life could transform potential conflict into clarity and empowerment, and how the quiet act of establishing limits and honoring mutual respect can ripple outward, influencing behavior, reinforcing values, and creating space for trust to flourish. In living fully on her own terms, she also discovered the subtle, enduring joys of autonomy, the small but profound satisfaction that comes from making decisions unencumbered by obligation or expectation. Each choice, whether mundane or significant, became a reaffirmation of the principles she now held central: foresight, respect for boundaries, and the prioritization of relationships rooted in authenticity rather than material gain. She reveled in the freedom to design her life, schedule her days, and invest her energy in people and pursuits that resonated with her values, understanding that this deliberate focus on what truly matters not only enhanced her own quality of life, but also modeled a vision of mature, thoughtful living that others could admire and emulate. By the time the months passed and the initial exhilaration of independence evolved into a sustained rhythm of life, Eleanor could see with clarity how the challenges she had faced had become instruments of wisdom and empowerment. Her story, though deeply personal, carried universal resonance. It illustrated that careful planning and foresight can safeguard well-being, that boundaries are essential for maintaining dignity and healthy relationships, and that the most meaningful connections are those built on genuine care, attention, and mutual respect rather than financial incentive. In embracing these truths, Eleanor not only reclaimed her life, but also transformed her understanding of what it means to live with purpose, integrity, and a profound appreciation for the people and experiences that truly enrich the human journey. As Eleanor stood in the bright morning sunlight streaming through the windows of her new condo, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for far too long, a feeling born not of wealth or possessions, but of dignity, self-respect, and the knowledge that she had reclaimed control over her own life. The years she had spent under the shadow of her sons, indifference, and the lingering grief of her husband's passing now seemed like distant memories, eclipsed by the clarity and empowerment that came from asserting her rightful place in the world. She had discovered, in the most personal and profound of ways, that independence is not merely a state of being, but a mindset, a commitment to honoring oneself, to living according to one's own principles, and to refusing to allow anyone else to diminish one's worth. The journey that led her here had been both challenging and transformative. At every stage, from the shock of being excluded from the initial will reading to the surprising revelation of her late husband's carefully planned provisions, she had learned the value of patience, foresight, and resilience. She realized that true empowerment often requires courage, the courage to face uncomfortable truths, to confront those who would undermine you, and to make decisions that may initially seem daunting, but ultimately affirm your worth. Eleanor's actions at the lawyer's office had been a pivotal moment, not merely a legal victory, but a symbolic reclaiming of her voice, her authority, and her dignity. By standing firm and revealing the authentic will, she demonstrated that respect is not demanded through intimidation or anger, but through clarity, composure, and the courage to uphold what is just and fair. In her quiet moments, Eleanor reflected on the broader lessons her experience offered, She understood that self-respect is not an entitlement, but a practice, nurtured by setting boundaries, making informed choices, and refusing to allow the opinions or demands of others to dictate one's value. Her son's behavior, while hurtful, had served as a mirror, showing her the consequences of neglecting personal boundaries and the ways in which reliance on others for validation can leave one vulnerable to disrespect. By taking decisive action, she had not only secured her own future, but had also set an example for others, illustrating that it is never too late to reclaim dignity and assert one's autonomy. Embracing her independence, Eleanor explored the joys and opportunities that life had previously denied her. Simple pleasures, a leisurely morning coffee, the soft rustle of pages in a favorite book. Strolls through local parks now carried the weight of newfound freedom. She traveled to places she had always dreamed of visiting, engaged in hobbies and experiences that enriched her mind and spirit, and cultivated friendships with people who valued her for who she was, not for what she could provide. Each day reinforced the lesson that happiness is not a product of external approval or material wealth, but of the alignment between one's actions, values, and sense of self-worth. Her story, though intensely personal, resonated with a universal truth: independence and happiness are attainable at any stage of life, provided one is willing to embrace change, trust in one's own judgment, and prioritize respect, both for oneself and from others. Eleanor came to see that age, circumstance, or past disappointments need not define the possibilities of the present or future. What mattered most was the courage to step into a life designed by choice, rather than by expectation, to honor one's own needs and desires, while maintaining integrity and compassion. In doing so, she transformed what could have been a story of marginalization and disappointment into one of empowerment, inspiration, and profound personal growth. In sharing her journey with others, Eleanor hopes to offer more than just a tale of legal triumph or personal vindication. She hopes to remind viewers that dignity is a right, self-respect is essential, and the pursuit of happiness is not limited by age or circumstance. Her experience underscores the importance of setting boundaries with loved ones, of planning thoughtfully for the future, and of recognizing the inherent value each person holds in their own life. By reclaiming her life, she exemplifies that independence is a gateway to joy, and that taking responsibility for one's own happiness is both liberating and transformative. To those watching, Eleanor's journey serves as both guidance and encouragement. Honor yourself, stand firm in the face of adversity, and never underestimate the power of living authentically. The path to self-respect and freedom may be challenging, but it is always worth pursuing, for the rewards are immeasurable peace, confidence, and the capacity to embrace life fully on your own terms. Thank you so much for joining this story of resilience, empowerment, and hope. If you found inspiration in Eleanor's journey, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel so you can continue exploring stories that uplift, educate, and motivate. Your support helps share these meaningful narratives with others who may need encouragement, and together we can celebrate the strength, dignity, and independence that everyone deserves.